Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and a special Father's Day to James Reed. The cat is father to the man. Our progeny are in the Father's Day mix. Anyway, this is our 9th Zoom Enclave. We started it soon after the sheltering in place. And we've been on email ever since we got Zoom bombed. And sometimes people ask me, can you send the invitation to other people? Yes, you can. The only thing is make sure to send it to people that you know and warn them, please don't put this on a general listserv, etc. So you can send the invitation. The other question or comment that I get is, if you miss a reading, you can find them easily and quickly, thanks to Charles Alexander's great service or presence of putting them up on YouTube almost immediately within 24 hours of our reading. How do you find them? Put in Enclave and the name of the person that you're searching for, and it should come up really quickly. So we have several more Enclave readings. After Bob's reading is Lainey Brown next week, then Peter Gizzy, Joseph Donahue, Lissa Walsack, Charles Bernstein, and then Ray and I are going to conclude the first Enclave set at the very beginning of August. And then we're going to go on hiatus and see whether Zoom readings later in the fall we're still in need of them, which we may be. So we'll consult and see how things go. Anyway, welcome to the Enclave Reading Series. I'm happy to turn the mic over to Ray. Ray is the author of 14 books of poems, including Wobble. She's been the finalist for the National Book Award twice, for Partly and more recently, and Versed, I'm sorry. Versed also. Okay, you can correct me later. Okay, Versed won the Pulitzer Prize also, and the National Book Critics Circle Award. She is emeritus at UC San Diego, and she has a new book, Conjure, which will be published by Wesleyan in October. So thank you, Ray, for hosting this series with me. And now give your introduction.
Thank you, Jeanne. Bob Perelman is Professor Emeritus from the University at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of 13 books of poetry, including 7 works, Virtual Reality, 10 to 1, which is a selected out from Wesleyan, Playing Bodies, which is a collaboration with his wife, the artist Francie Shaw, If Life, and Jack and Jill in Troy, both out from Ruth Books, just to name some. Plus 3 major critical works, The Marginalization of Poetry from California, The Trouble with Genius from Princeton, and Modernism the Morning After from Alabama. I think I got those presses right. I would describe Bob and his work as brilliant, witty, and highly attuned to the psychological and ethical conundrums we live with and sometimes confront. For a few decades now, Bob has been mixing and matching the moderns, Freud, and Homer in his own signature way to show us where we live now. Philip Larkin famously wrote, "Your mom and dad, they fuck you up." Perelman has been illustrating how the stories we live with, the monuments of our culture, do the same. In my view, no poet is better than Bob at showing what it's like, how it feels to live in a totally mediated society. His poem Virtual Reality from the 1993 book of the same name, though inevitably dated in its technological references, is something I still go back to when I want to consider either postmodernism or the effects of the surveillance society. To quote from the beginning of that poem, or at least from somewhere in that poem, hope of automatic writing, of turning the wheel freely in a narrative of convincing possibility was only a byproduct of the fallen leaves drifting sideways in slow motion as the BMW cornered away from us at 40. We were recording everything, but the unlabeled cassettes were spilling over into the footage currently being shot. This was making the archives frankly random. So Bob was prescient. This is even more the case now than it was then, I'd say. In this poem, we want what they tell us to want, but we can't have it. We can't even find the pictures we took of it. Soon, presumably, we'll be given something else to desire. Bob's most recent book, Jack and Jill in Troy, one of the better titles, I must say, ever, is a contemporary encounter with the Iliad. To take liberties with the blurb I wrote for it, one of its blurbs, and now it's time for the war to begin again. Why? The gods say so. Who are the gods? You know, the 1% with their access to special effects. So Jack and Jill is a book for our time of endless war, and it's also very much about class. Here are some sentences from the prose poem Divine Laughter. The gods are laughing, The gods are laughing inexhaustibly. Eternity is happy, ... hinting at how life can arise from matter or providing an early glimpse of unlimited energy, perpetual laughter betokening some inexhaustible amusement arising from the weave of existence. But there's also the tear-sensitive take where, okay, the gods are in their skyboxes laughing at the tragic hijinks below. The gods like gamers with endless lives, and us, Super Marios, Ms. Pac-Mans, token striving and dying to hold their attention. And with that, ouch, I'll turn it over to Bob Perelman.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jeanne, and thanks, folks, for being here. So I'm going to read, first half I'm going to read Jack and Jill in Troy. And I should say about the title, and thank you, Ray, for liking that title. For me, I called this book Jack and Jill for the first 90% of its gestation period, and I felt tremendous angst about, but it's got all this Homer stuff in it. Why am I calling it Jack and Jill? So finally, just really before it got sent off, Francie, my wife, Francie Shaw, kind of sat me down and said, it doesn't have to be called Jack and Jill. And she suggested Jack and Jill in Troy, which I sort of took as a kind of, lifesaver in the, kind of, she was throwing me a lifeline in the sea or something. Anyway, so I can't claim too much credit for the title. But I will read some of it. And so, okay, let me just start here. And it's not all Iliad, and it's not all Jack and Jill. It's also just some of writing in one's 70s, and there's kid stuff in it too. This first poem is not kid stuff though. It's called Folk Wisdom. The mind, they say, is like a clit or supernatural fingertip, a sensitivity far beyond the spurious permanence of names. And the best thing, or at least the best thing so far, is that this unavoidable sensitivity leaves everything up in the air for the newcomers, the not yet speaking, the infants. And this is a retelling of a moment from the Iliad. It's called Aphrodite and Helen. This is where Aphrodite appears and shoves Helen back into the bedroom where Paris is waiting for her. Aphrodite and Helen. It's private what we're talking about, but everybody sees it. The dictionary meaning of the next word is aroused. But don't you think in context, angry makes better sense? Instantly, Helen knew the goddess's neck, her whole being, through the disguise of the old woman, faithful wool carder, the one she loved most back in Sparta. But this was someone quite different, and Helen cut through the disguise, raising her voice to Aphrodite. Listen, I tell you, it enrages me. Each time you get total access to everything I ever felt, you dandle that thin chain hanging from nowhere all the way down to nursing. Then you get to shove me back into the fucking bedroom. And there's the airhead lover fondling his armor, always the same grin each time he sees me. Okay. These, by the way, I mean, I'm very irresponsible. These are not translations. This is like just a moment from the Iliad, which I then take all sorts of liberties with. But, okay, now this one is also sort of Iliad stuff. And it's about the overall plot of the Iliad, which is Hector gets killed, and then he's the Trojan hero, and then Achilles, the Greek hero, is trying to dishonor the body and drags it around. And finally, the King Priam comes and negotiates a return of the body. Paganism for dummies. First lesson. Lessons are for dummies. A life of wake up, you're late for your lesson. Think about it. How many lessons are there going to be? If they're never going to end, what's the point? As opposed to the gods with their not superpowers exactly, more like an absolutely upper hand, free to appear or not, answer prayers or not, wield special effects, knock down any structure, whisk favorites out of danger. They're on top, superlative beings, never wrong for long. The problem is their names, and of course the toga situation. But the names are bad enough. These days, Zeus only works if you're naming a dachshund. Though that's not totally fair. In their enclave, now there's a reference to our reading. In their enclave, the gods do remain skilled workers, troopers, believable in every scene, now observing from high distances, now throwing their weight around, even getting bent out of shape when it says to in the script, i.e. Zeus weeping over Sarpedon, a favorite human son dead. And he weeps bloody tears, real ones. No one else does that. But that's not to say human death on an epic scale teaches the gods anything at all. Far from it. In general, they could care less. It's us getting the hard ones. If you want your son's body back, then you kiss the hand that killed him and dragged the corpse around obsessively. You kiss the hand because you need the body, because a funeral is not legitimate without the body. If you learn nothing else, get that through your head. Okay, I'm going to read this one. I've read this before. Many people may have heard it. It's called All-Purpose Disaster Poem, and it has nothing to do with the Iliad. It actually, you can't tell from the poem, but it is a retelling of a little moment in the middle of Beowulf. I'll tell it now. Yeah, in the middle of Beowulf, where there's a wedding party, two clans get together. During the after party, there's a murder. Meanwhile, a big blizzard comes and they're iced in, these two clans. And now there's a situation of blood vengeance because of the murder, but there they are stuck in the same building, iced in over the winter. And so this struck me as typical of our current situation of being sort of frozen in place with these violent conflicts, not quite resolvable. Okay, all-purpose disaster poem, and it's also a kind of a fantasia on a line by Charles Bernstein. It's your fucking fault, which I couldn't get out of my head. All-purpose disaster poem. It's your fucking fault that it's like this. Hand me the remote, would you? Do you need another? I'm having one. It wasn't ever like this, and now it's always like this. And it's your fucking fault. Before, nobody imagined anything like this, but now nobody can think of anything else, and it's let's just leave it. We can't just leave it. And that's your fucking fault. Not that I'm blaming you. There was nothing you could do, really. The friend of my enemy's BFF who just happens to be the boss's lapdog, and one fine day some drone just happens to blow him to shreds, and there's really nothing anyone could have done or have not done, so who's to know? And that it's that random is your fucking fault. Hand me the remote, would you? When did that guy say he'd be here? 2 hours ago, right? And he's bringing what? Coors? Coors Light? Honestly, fuck you. I would never. You're saying I ordered Coors Light. You can't be serious. Give me the remote. Mad Men's on. Remember when they tried to cancel the 60s? They're always trying to cancel the 60s. The 60s are dead. Deader than psychedelic rock. And whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that nature pisses off my white identified neighbor? Think, because it didn't just happen that it'll never snow enough to cool down my being pissed off, and that's your fucking fault. Of course I walked around in my red corduroy bell-bottoms, wherever I wanted to go. And I'm sure you walked around wherever you wanted to go, in your red corduroy bell-bottoms. Why not? It wasn't as if there weren't enough red corduroy bell-bottoms to go around. You're missing the point. The point is we lost the 60s and all the revolutionary potential, and the specific point is it's your fucking fault. It could have been anyone, which goes without saying. Population is a fact of life. Evolution is a fact, a great number of facts. There are more people than either of us has time for. Fact, outer space exists. Fact, fish are disappearing and the seas are rising. Not quite on cue, but we all get the idea. Giant parking lots destroy manners. It's not really a question. Patriarchy sucks the pleasures out of life at an unreplenishable rate. We agree. Every drop goes without saying. Sue me for... Or let's just shut up and wait for our fucking Coors Light. But can we at least agree that it didn't have to happen? But it did. It could have been anyone, but it was you. Where's the remote? This is called Bigger Than Big. And this goes back to Iliad territory. Zeus savors the smoke of perfectly spiced barbecue. And when the really nice wine spills on the proper surface, that's also a thing he greatly enjoys. He's way up there, but the scent arrives full-bodied. Like they say, just because you're already on high, no reason not to get a little high. Sensory bliss. Snort it. All right, I'll read this. Okay, this is a retelling of, it's called what is it called? The Deception of Zeus, the Beguilement of Zeus, where Hera and Zeus are temporarily on different sides of the Trojan War, and she's trying to stop his vigilance over things. Hera and Zeus at home. At this point, Hera thought just how to get what she wanted. She'd aim all his pleasure right back at the father, brother, husband. She'd knock him off his vantage. His wishes were hateful to her. She'd wreck his plan. So she armored up with oils and other irresistibles. She'd already got hold of the love bead and went up the mountain and presented herself like some ingenue, first time in town, micro-fidgeting, hyper-compliant. As for him, never had he felt so alive, so on top of his game. Not when he played badminton with Daphne, Solitaire with Lydia, catch the drift with Sue, let's make a deal with Ray, post office with Dawn, rolled that perfect game with Sally. This was like the first time. Even better, it was right before the first time, which was finally going to happen. The cues worked to perfection. The ground literally grew flowers beneath them. The atmosphere candied into a golden fog, so no one outside could really see all that much of anything. Sleep crept out from the branches. Victory was hers. Candy from a baby. Then afterwards, when things are a mess, his entire schedule's shot, the beeper won't shut up. That's precisely when she gets to tell him, look, it was just sex. I swear on our marriage bed, don't start. The young know all this. They've been hearing it since forever. But they also know that if you've missed the latest, nothing you know is worth much. That's why screens are sacred and why it's almost physically impossible to look away. Miss something, you're screwed. I should say that when Ray, I showed this to Ray, a draft of it, and she said, put me in there. So I did. I wanted to put in words with friends with Ray, but it was too awkward because the with thing. And I've never played words with friends with Ray, so there. The between walls. Down here, when the gods do appear, they're in control. And if situations arise, they've got special effects to make the winning and losing pivot according to the plan, capital P plan, which everyone knows, though it's hard to keep track of all that's happening between the various walls and the contested spaces outside. But everyone already knows how it all turns out. The lofty walled town with the famous keep and the endless scandals burned to the ground, all that foreign noise, but real parenting skills, dense mats of local know-how burned to ash, the unpredictable entirety of that intermeshed information long escaped as smoke, and us meanwhile listening to the plan unfolding, the serious back and forth. We almost lose, but of course, because it's in our language, we count ourselves among the victors. Even with the insinuating buzz of strangeness, what we hear is ours. But when you get to the end and the city's not yet gone, it's hard to be sure it was them and not us. Because what is happening makes it hard to credit that there ever was a plan. Hard to believe it's not going to be us losing access to everything we know. And that is thinking about the fact that at the end of the Iliad, Troy hasn't fallen, even though everybody knows it's going to fall. So it's like sometimes I would think that the Iliad was really not the Greek sort of national poem, but a kind of Trojan, cosmopolitan Trojan poem. And the Greeks are just this external military force. Okay, here is a very serious part of the book. It's called At Emma's Grave, which I rarely read. This was for Emma Bernstein's yahrzeit ceremony. It's in 7 parts. And each of the parts has 7 lines, because it's about, 7 is a kind of magic number in it. At Emma's Grave, 1. They say the mind can keep sense alive about 7 seconds, and that we can register at most 7 things, coins, pebbles, apples, or 6, 5, almost nothing. 2, maybe that's why we invented the present as a place to live, to keep the things we do know so exactly, keep them exactly, keep everything, keep what we know near, at hand, alive in our minds. Emma. 3, it's hard to remember what the light looked like then, what it was saying in such detail. Hard to count the blackbirds in that pie, the extra special one. 4 and 20, they said. But we only see the released flock, the single flying mass. Each one, the first and only birth. 4, such a small set of seconds to put everything in, since not everything is here that we love. which makes it impossible not to want that small set to have been utterly different, the flock to have swooped right, not left, to have landed in any other tree. 5, not the look of the light, clear, vertical, soft, childlike, or whatever our 7 seconds say, but how fast we've already seen what is here and what is not. That's what makes the 7 seconds so hard. 6, what we see makes us not remember what it looked like just a second ago, now all different, with us at a loss, with that stone there. 7, it is our privilege alone to disappear, to never forget that we do, never forget to set down what must be set down, so that it not be forgotten, not be lost in all this time. Emma. And this is the last I'll read from the book. It's called Once is Never, Twice is Always. There's a phrase in Homeric studies, hapax legomenon. Hapax equals once, legomenon said. A hapax legomenon is a word we only see that once. So how do we know what it means? How do we know it's even a word? Like in bird watching, if there's only that one-time bird, how do you know it's a distinct species? How do you know that one-time word is a word at all and not some transmission glitch? Still, these hapaxes, these once-only words, continued to exist, huddled in with all the other epic noises, lines, speeches, counter-speeches, people would hear, learn, repeat, know, which is how we still read this now stable, huge set of words. The Iliad structured school days for centuries. The massed particulars kept more or less in place amid passing successions of heads, each touch specific to its moment, but easy to transfer somewhere else. So 600 years later, Augustus, just turned emperor, in fact newly deified, had only to quote the line where Hector is lecturing Paris about how truly stupid Paris's sex life was, or Augustus's displeasure at daughter Julia's public gyrations to travel down the generations to us, or his tailored sigh over his daughter's tedious transgressions to go viral. But back to hapaxes, which are the opposite of viral. Take booyah, which I first heard Stuart Scott use on TV. Praise punctuating 3-pointers, heroic accuracy, booyah, like Marines expelling air from toned, well-armed bellies, ready to defend wherever this is now. Booyah, you got a problem with that? But what about 1,000 years later, when there's only that one lonely hapax booyah on some tattered page? What is it then? Boast, incantation, fuck you, ineradicable ululation? Okay, so those are the poems I think are good and finished. Now I'm going to read new stuff, which is much more hot off the press. I mean, I typed this up, I printed it out half an hour ago and was making changes. And these are, I don't usually do this. And these are all, full of, they're a little Swiss cheesy and whatever. But I'm going to read them. Just do it. Okay. And do I have anything to say about them? Not really. I'm just going to read them, I think. Did you hear the one about short-term and long-term memory? Maybe you're like me and you've forgotten the punchline. Something about a televangelist and a game warden walk into an operating room at a most inopportune moment, major changes being carried out, but it's not the kind of thing either one of them knows much about. But there is a microphone right in front of them. Okay, the ones I think are more done have titles, and these don't have titles. When the brain wakes up and changes itself in momentary delight, then the air comes in, flooding the tongue with words, and the pen, not to be outdone, skates on the activated space. Thus the day can begin disentangling itself. No, I mean, start to shed its skin. But no magic wands, okay? I don't want to have to ward off Tinkerbell and happy endings. The inexhaustible light of glory. Let human memory sleep its deep, despotic sleep. Okay, this is called, well, I don't have a title. I was about to think of one, but I can't. Or I censored what I thought of. One day, the dream came true, and the body not only lived forever, but lived every moment forever. And the mind knew it all, through and through, to the horizon. But where is everybody? And here's a good title, but not necessarily with a good poem. The title is We'll Trade Time for Poem. You open the book and put your oar in just to see the words emerging, thinking of one another. Some first, some next, some at the end. The monster storm that's blown in has blown irony well out of the water. So readers can't make the meaning any more than writers can. Nor can anyone say, I've had enough, thanks. Okay, self-evaluation. When are you going to get a grip? 72, and you're still a big blank beach blanket bingo card without borders. Never any matches, catching fire by accident. 72, storm moving in, can't be. The beast with one head has picked up the pen and, backed by the leaky bucket of sayings and doings, intends to address us all from here to eternity and back. The page, stopping where it does, is like the tragic chorus, saying the obvious and slowing it down until it stops somewhere. And here we are, in our own soup. This is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Don't write anything new, and don't write anything old. Just say the sky is blue, and the ice is no longer staying cold enough, nor is the ocean particularly wet, or at least not purely wet. It's filled to bursting with the twinkle in the billions of enchained eyes floating on the surface. Chatty fossils. 1. When you dig us out of the mud, I bet you'll see right away that our legs mattered a lot, that we stood up tall into our social data smoke, like colossuses, misspelled, misidentified, never given our due. 2, such sad gray tree remnants, the ones that were, that used to be, and keep talking about it. Talk your ear off if you let them. This is called Nearer to Something. One day, watching the new grow old, I suddenly realized that things were continuous and that meanings weren't. They started and stopped. It pepped me up. After you're done living forever, you start getting catalogs. You climb down from the high vantage, and the minute you touch down, they start arriving. It's like the past got fast forwarded and then jams. Forever was so flexible, so forgiving, so low key in the long run, but all of a sudden it's now, and nobody gets to finish saying it. Now, that multidimensional powerhouse, with special effects entrain attention, grab our petrodollars where they hurt, and glue us to the next second, which at least makes it easy to forget how the water's rising. And here's one that is pretty broad in its humor. The needle in the haystack thought it was pretty sharp, but how to get the point across to these hayseeds so that the stitch wouldn't come undone? And where was the thread, stretchable, super strong, passing through past and future with the ease of a present fact staring you in the face? But the hay is the overwhelming fact, a sea of troubles to drown any singularity in the unjust washtub of difference. Let the strongest chemicals win. Sometimes it helps to have a theory of up and down, say, so you can sense what vertical means, exactly at the moment. And down the trail you go at speed, at one with the Industrial Revolution. Meanwhile, though, our needle was not decidedly at one with its environment or with history. The haystack was an immense pile of former leaves of grass, a jumble of loving gushes of photosynthesis, now an outdated armory of sunlight, requiring many ruminations and many stomachs to make any use of. Pulp poetry. Born on paper, like poems for hundreds of years, not so much sturdy as comforting, forgiving, long-suffering, convenient pages, staying blank and open, genius or noodler doesn't matter. Downtime is real too, and all these forests harvested to the dry, flat earth with nobody to hear the carnage, all those leafy structures giving up their being for all these other hot, needy beings in their dens writing poems on the blanks provided. Science in exile. That this many people are this crazy can't just be coincidence. It must be something in the water, in the air, in the electricity, which no one elected to run things. Okay. History of music. Well, think of something else then, like atonality. Webern in April, lighting that cigarette. Boom. So few notes left. Appropriate dirge for the besiegers of Leningrad. That's a very, there's a little story in there. Webern was killed by a US soldier in Berlin at the end of the war when he went out for a cigarette. Earth Day, Mind Day, every day. I take off my old hat to you, mother and father time, mother and father and other, but we'll go into that later. I take off my antiquated hat. I take my antiquated hat off, fully off, in acknowledgement of your overwhelming seriousness. None of those great jokes I thought we shared turned out to have any legs. They died, curling in on themselves, popping down into black holes of sarcasm or worse. And then what to do with all the old expressions in my ear. It's starting to look like you and your superior seriousness are just going to leave them decomposed back into words or whatever comes next, or earlier. It's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. P.S. Really, what to do about those old expressions? Not just lodged in the air, but living in the space I thought was reserved for me. Not living there, coming down before breakfast, humming the same old, worse than same old. I saw Mommy kissing Santa Claus, the first Noel, the Star-Spangled Banner, blaring, invading, earworms from Mars. No, not that. Earworms from our very own Earth. Earth words, earworms, you win. My hat is off. Just a few more. Looking in the cracking mirror at my still recognizable self, who wasn't looking back, not really. So this is as good a time as any to ask, what's all that wrong with bad poetry? Is it that it makes bad people feel good about themselves, if not about us? And what's so wrong about that? First things first, I am large, I contain multitudes. What's so wrong, you ask, sideways, disengaged? Everyone feels just how wrong it is and how long it's stayed wrong. It feels like wrong is here for the long haul, getting worse, like clockwork or history or a widespread rash. It's your actual fears in the flesh. Plus, it's the only time you get to have a mind. Okay. Don't let the data soothe you or your strong skull fool you, your flashy nerves serve you another cup of pleasure. Don't rent out your seconds to the first impulse already cascading through echoes and other special effects. None of these words is native. Every species is invasive. Two more little ones. To a raindrop. It looks like it's one of those if not problems. Don't look down unless you want to be convicted by gravity. And while I've got you on the line, don't you hate slow-mo? It's an insult to our brevity. Self-improvement. Put down the puppet strings and come out with your hands at your sides. Relaxed, bipedal, bicoastal, bicameral, two of everything, mostly. Many-mindedness. That's the only thing that's going to work. Okay, thank you. That's my